Let me ask you about Zelensky. I'm curious about your thoughts on how he is being portrayed now as this heroic figure, a modern day Churchill. That's the standard line about him. And also your assessment of how serious he was to ever fulfilling his election mandate to make peace. People forget this, but in 2019, he was elected with an overwhelming mandate, more than 70% of the vote. And his promise was to make peace, to end the war in the Donbass. And he even vowed to pay a political cost for it. But then what happened? He came in and he immediately faces threats from the far right. They tell him that if you make peace with the Russian-backed rebels, we'll overthrow your government. Some even said we'll end your life. And shortly after his election, I interviewed the late scholar Stephen F. Cohen of NYU and Princeton. And he said that unless the U.S. supports Zelensky's peace mandate, there's no way that he can ever end the war in the Donbass because the far right will just overpower him.
You have a situation now, which seems not to be widely understood, that the new president of Ukraine, Zelensky, ran as a peace candidate. This is a bit of a stretch, and maybe it doesn't mean a whole lot to your generation, but he ran a kind of George McGovern campaign. The difference was McGovern got wiped out, and Zelensky won by, I think, 72%. He won an enormous mandate to make peace. So that means he has to negotiate with Vladimir Putin. And there are various formats, right? There's the so-called Minsk format, which involves the German and the French. There's bilateral directly with Putin. But his willingness, and this is what's important and not well reported here, his willingness to deal directly with Putin, which his predecessor, Poroshenko, was not, or couldn't, or whatever reason, actually required considerable boldness on Zelensky because there are opponents of this in Ukraine, and they are armed. Some people say they're fascist, but they're certainly ultra-nationalist. And they have said that they'll remove and kill Zelensky if he continues along this line of negotiating with Putin. So now along comes Trump, right? So Trump makes a wrong-headed phone call to Zelensky about Biden and information. It was a wrong thing to do. There were two ways of looking at that. But the more important thing is, and that's why I'd like to see the full transcript of we've only been given a partial so far as I know. I want to know if Trump encouraged Zelensky to continue the negotiation with Putin. And here's why. Zelensky cannot go forward, as I've explained. I mean, his life is being threatened, literally, by quasi-fascist movements in Ukraine. He can't go forward with full peace negotiations with Russia, with Putin, unless America has his back. Maybe that won't be enough, but unless the White House encourages this diplomacy, Zelensky has no chance of negotiating an end to the war. So the stakes are enormously high.
And, of course, the U.S. policy choice has been well known. They continue to flood Ukraine with weapons. They did not, I think we can credibly say they did not want to see an end to the war in the Donbass. But I'm curious your thoughts on Zelensky himself, given that he was backed by an oligarch who also funds the Azov Battalion being one of the key participants in the war in the Donbass and very opposed to any peace with Russia. Can we say that Zelensky was ever serious about making peace, about actually ever fulfilling his election mandate? Or do you think he made genuine steps that he was just too powerless to fully see through?
I think he was genuine. I think that the aspirations for peace were mutual, both from the population, voters who supported him, and he himself at that point, given his background and coming from the Russophone part of the country and so on. And the proof of that is that he had that meeting in Paris of the Normandy format with Putin in December 2019. But even as he did that, of course, the Steinmeier formula to fulfill the Minsk Accords, which he was thinking of doing. And then afterwards, his chief of staff convened a meeting. So there were elements. However, but as you say, he didn't have the US support. He didn't even have European Union support effectively, which is quite astonishing. Angela Merkel and Macron, much talk, but they really did not, because they were there at that Normandy meeting in France. But astonishingly enough, bottom line, what about Zelensky? I personally, obviously, enjoyed him very much when he was playing the comic actor in Servant of the People, a fantastic show, and really enjoyed it. And therefore, we all had a certain well of sympathy for this man, who we may think that maybe life is stranger than art, and that maybe this person would have an understanding. And also, if you watch his interviews back in 2012, 2013, 2014, where he, in Russian, fluent, and he spoke moving, he understood Russia, he understood Ukraine, and so with a sardonic intelligence. However, the tragedy of Zelensky is that he never really ultimately became an independent statesperson. He just didn't. He failed. He failed even in his attempts to achieve peace, which I give him all credit for in that first year, but he failed. And the adulation which now goes to Zelensky, in my view, is fundamentally misdirected. Zelensky is not a serious statesman. He is not. That he is a failure on the most magnificent scale. If he was, even if he had a scintilla of serious statesmanship about him, leadership qualities, he would have easily averted this war. He had endless warnings, they say, from the US. I mean, we know the public ones, and allegedly the US and possibly the UK had intelligence information. Now, we all know how valuable that intelligence information is going to be. But if they, they kept saying warning of Russian invasion. If they had any information, perhaps they fed it to Zelensky. But obviously they didn't, because Zelensky, until the day before the invasion, was saying there will be no invasion. But with 150,000 Russian troops, it would not have taken much. Everybody constantly criticizes me, and perhaps you, for failing to take Ukrainian agency into account. Yes, at that moment, we would have loved to have seen more agency in terms of forcing a peace deal. Okay, we had these NATO, Russia and US-Russia peace treaties, European peace treaties from December 2021 on the table. Where was Ukraine in all these discussions? Why didn't Zelensky at that moment, and I kept expecting something, to say, look, let's sort this out. Instead of which, all he had to do was 5 words, which he knew wasn't going to happen anyway, anytime soon. Ukraine will not join NATO. That's all he had to say. Let's call, if Putin was bluffing, call his bluff. But instead of which, we had this catastrophic war. So we have somebody who is not a statesman. And I must say, if you read the speeches today, and his endless speeches, which are given standing applauses, standing ovations, and so on, they, in my view, are demagogy and populism of the worst order. I actually find them odious. I can't read it. I mean, I've read many of his speeches, including the one at the Munich Security Conference just a few days before the war. It was awful in the sense it was filled with a primitive hatred, filled with a violent language of division. As I say, there is not a statesman-like bone in that man's body. And this is why he is willing to see this war. And as long as he is in charge, this war will continue, because even when he began to talk about a peace agenda, immediately it was a trick, because he said, okay, we will have Ukraine's neutral status, but it will have to go to a referendum, which of course, the outcome of it, who knows what it was going to be. So even that is not in good faith. So it's, I do not share the laudatory views. Yes, of course, the country is under attack, and he has been very brave. But as you say, simply calling for more weapons, he should now be calling for the United States to broker a peace, to save the suffering of his people. And in a sense, it actually makes me quite angry, the way that he is being lauded, and yet it's over the bodies of, obviously Russia has the primary responsibility. It's the invading, attacking party. But on the other hand, let's have a bit of Ukrainian agency in all of this. If this is what people are constantly calling for, go for it.